Part 5, Chapter 6 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 6, Reading by Sight and by Sound. Read by Amy Bodkin, Navarre, Florida. Learning to read is hard work. Probably that vague whole which we call education offers no more difficult and repellent task than that to which every little child is, or ought to be, set down, the task of learning to read. We realize the labor of it when some grown man makes a heroic effort to remedy shameful ignorance, but we forget how contrary to nature it is for a little child to occupy himself with dreary hieroglyphics, all so dreadfully alike, when the world is teeming with interesting objects which he is agog to know. But we cannot excuse our volatile Tommy, nor is it good for him that we should. It is quite necessary he should know how to read, and not only so, the discipline of the task is altogether wholesome for the little man. At the same time, let us recognize that learning to read is to many children hard work, and let us do what we can to make the task easy and inviting. Knowledge of arbitrary symbols. In the first place, let us bear in mind that reading is not a science nor an art. Even if it were, the children must still be the first consideration with the educator, but it is not. Learning to read is no more than picking up how we can a knowledge of certain arbitrary symbols for objects and ideas. There are absolutely no right and necessary steps to reading, each of which leads to the next. There is no true beginning, middle, or end, for the arbitrary symbols we must know in order to read are not letters but words. By way of illustration, consider the delicate differences of sound represented by the letter O in the last sentence. To analyze and classify the sounds of O in for, symbols, no, order, to, not, and words is a curious, not especially useful study for a philologist, but a laborious and inappropriate one for a child. It is time we faced the fact that the letters which compose an English word are full of philological interest, and that their study will be a valuable part of education by and by. But meantime sound and letter sign are so loosely wedded in English that to base the teaching of reading on the sounds of the letters only is to lay up for the child much analytical labor, much mental confusion due to the irregularities of the language, and some little moral strain in making the sounds of a letter in a given word fall under any of the sounds he has been taught. Definitely, what is it we propose in teaching a child to read? A, that he shall know at sight, say, some 1,000 words. B, that he shall be able to build up new words with the elements of these. Let him learn 10 new words a day, and in 20 weeks he will be to some extent able to read without any question as to the number of letters in a word. For the second, and less important part of our task, the child must know the sounds of the letters, and acquire power to throw given sounds into new combinations. What we want is a bridge between the child's natural interests and those arbitrary symbols with which he must become acquainted, and which, as we have seen, are words and not letters. These symbols should be interesting. The child cares for things, not words. His analytic power is very small. His observing faculty is exceedingly quick and keen. Nothing is too small for him. He will spy out the eye of a fly. Nothing is too intricate. He delights in puzzles. But the thing he learns to know by looking at it is a thing which interests him. Here we have the key to reading. No meaningless combinations of letters, no cla, cle, clee, claw, cl, no ath, eth, ith, oth, uth, should be presented to him. The child should be taught from the first to regard the printed word, as he already regards the spoken word, as the symbol of fact or idea full of interest. How easy to read robin redbreast, buttercups, and daisies! The number of letters in the words is no matter. The words themselves convey such interesting ideas that the general form and look of them fixes itself on the child's brain by the same law of association of ideas which makes it easy to couple the objects with their spoken names. Having got a word fixed on the sure peg of the idea it conveys, the child will use his knowledge of the sounds of the letters to make up other words containing the same elements with great interest. When he knows butter, he is quite ready to make mutter by changing the B for an M. Tommy's first lesson. But example is better than precept, and more convincing than the soundest reasoning. This is the sort of reading lesson we have in view. Tommy knows his letters by name and sound, but he knows no more. Today he is to be launched into the very middle of reading without any steps at all, because reading is neither an art nor a science, and has probably no beginning. Tommy is to learn to read today. I like little pussy, her coat is so warm. And he is to know those 9 words so well that he will be able to read them wherever they may occur henceforth and forevermore. Oh, yes, says a reader, as in the cock-robin lesson. Grant that the principle is sound, and there is much to be said on both sides of that question. But granted, who in the world could get through all the pasting and cutting and general messing preparatory to the great lesson? No, the method of the books may be only second best, but ready-made books must do for me. I have no time to make my own apparatus. I must own that the cutting and pasting was very clumsy, but the lesson served its purpose because it induced a good friend to education to have a delightful little pussy box prepared for us, loose words, nice big type, 2 lines in a bag. Whoso learns little pussy as it should be learned will know at least 100 words. Not a bad stock in trade for a beginner. All of them good, useful words that we want every day. There is one objection: such contractions as I'll are ugly at the best, and I hope that in the word lessons based upon little pussy, pieces will be chosen in which this fault is avoided. Steps. And now we begin. Material. Tommy's box of loose letters, the new little pussy box, pencil and paper, or, much better, blackboard and chalk. We write up in good big print hand, pussy. Tommy watches with interest. He knows the letters and probably says them as we write. Besides, he is prepared for the great event of his life. He knows he is going to begin to learn to read today, but we do not ask anything yet of his previous knowledge. We simply tell him that the word is pussy. Interest at once. He knows the thing, pussy, and the written symbol is pleasant in his eyes because it is associated with an existing idea in his mind. He is told to look at the word pussy until he is sure he would know it again. Then he makes pussy from memory with his own loose letters. Then the little bag containing our 2 lines in loose words is turned out, and he finds the word pussy. And lastly, the little sheet with the poem printed on it is shown to him, and he finds pussy, but is not allowed yet to find out the run of the rhyme. Coat, little, like, is, her, warm, I, so, are taught in the same way, in less time than it takes to describe the lesson. When each new word is learned, Tommy makes a column of the old ones and reads up and down and crisscross the column on the blackboard. Reading sentences. He knows words now, but he cannot yet read sentences. Now for the delight of reading. He finds at our dictation, amongst his loose words, pussy is warm, places them in reading order, one after the other, and then reads off the sentence. Joy as of one who has found a new planet, and Tommy has indeed found a new power. Then, her little coat is warm. Pussy is so little. I like pussy. Pussy is little like her coat, and so on through a dozen more little arrangements. If the rhyme can be kept a secret till the whole is worked out, so much the better. To make the verses up with his own loose words will give Tommy such a delicious sense that knowledge is power, as few occasions in after life will afford. Anyway, reading is to him a delight henceforth, and it will require very bad management indeed to make him hate it. Tommy's second lesson. Tommy promises himself another reading lesson next day, but he has instead a spelling lesson conducted somewhat in this way. He makes the word coat with his letters from memory if he can. If not, with the pattern word. Say coat slowly. Give the sound of the C. Take away C, and what have we left? A little help will get oat from him. How would you make boat? Say the word very slowly, bringing out the sound of B. He knows the sounds of the letters and says b-oat readily. Float. Two added sounds which you lead him to find out. Goat. He will give you the G, and find a goat a charming new word to know. Moat. He easily decides on the sound of M. A little talk about moat. The other words are too familiar to need explanation. Tommy will, no doubt, offer note, and we must make a clean breast of it and say, no, note is spelt with other letters. But what other letters we do not tell him now. Thus he comes to learn incidentally and very gradually that different groups of letters may stand for the same sounds. But we do not ask him to generalize. We only let him have the fact that n-oat does not spell the symbol we express by note. Stoat, he will be able to give the sound of the initial letters, and stoat again calls for a little talk, another interesting word. He has made a group of words with his letters, and there they are on the blackboard in columns thus: coat, moat, goat, float, stoat, boat. He reads the column up and down and crisscross. Every word has a meaning and carries an idea. Then the loose words he knows are turned out, and we dictate new sentences which he arranges. I like her goat. Her little stoat is warm. And so on, making the new words with loose letters. Unknown words. Now for a new experience we dictate Pussy is in the boat. Consternation. Tommy does not know in nor the. Put counters for the words you don't know. They may soon come in our lessons, and Tommy has a desire and a need, that is, an appetite for learning. Like combinations have different sounds. We deal with the remaining words in the same way. Little gives brittle, tittle, skittle. Pussy, is, I, and her give no new words. Like gives Mike and pike. So gives no, dough, the musical dough, and low. From warm we get arm, harm, charm, barm, alarm. We pronounce warm as arm. Tommy perceives that such a pronunciation is wrong and vulgar, and sees that all these words are sounded like arm, but not one of them like warm. That is, he sees that the same group of letters need not always have the same sound, but we do not ask him to make a note of. This new piece of knowledge, we let it grow into him gradually after many experiences. By this time he has 18 new words on the blackboard of which to make sentences with the 9 loose words of Pussy. Her skittle is little, her charm is brittle, her arm is warm, and so on. But we take care that the sentences make sense. Her goat is brittle, is silly, and not to be thought of at all. Tommy's new words are written in his notebook in print hand so that he can take stock of his possessions in the way of words. Moral training and reading lessons. The next day we do the last 2 lines of the stanza as at first. These lines afford hardly any material for a spelling lesson, so in our next lesson we go on with the second verse. But our stock of words is growing. We are able, as we go on, to make an almost unlimited number of little sentences. If we have to use counters now and then, why, that only whets our appetite for knowledge. By the time Tommy has worked little Pussy through, he has quite a large stock of words, has considerable power to attack new words with familiar combinations. What is more, he has achieved. He has courage to attack all learning, and has a sense that delightful results are quite within reach. Moreover, he learns to read in a way that affords him some moral training. There is no stumbling, no hesitation from the first, but bright attention and perfect achievement. His reading lesson is a delight of which he is deprived when he comes to his lesson in a lazy, drawling mood. Perfect enunciation and precision are insisted on, and when he comes to arrange the whole of the little rhyme in his loose words and read it off, most delightful of all the lessons, his reading must be a perfect and finished recitation. I believe that this is a practical, common-sense way to teach reading in English. It may be profitable for the little German child to work through all possible dreary combinations of letters before he is permitted to have any joy in reading, because wherever these combinations occur, they will have the sounds the child has learned laboriously. The fact that English is anomalous as regards the connection between sign and sound happily exonerates us from enforcing this dreary grind. End of Part 5, Chapter 6.
Part 5, Chapter 7 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 7, Recitation. The Children's Art. On this subject I cannot do better than refer the reader to Mr. Arthur Birrell's Recitation. This book purports to be a handbook for teachers in elementary schools. I wish that it may be very largely used by such teachers, and may also become a family handbook, though many of the lessons will not be called for in educated homes. There is hardly any subject so educative and so elevating as that which Mr. Birrell has happily described as the children's art. All children have it in them to recite. It is an imprisoned gift waiting to be delivered, like Ariel from the pine. In this most thoughtful and methodical volume we are possessed of the fit incantations. Use them duly, and out of the woodenness of even the most commonplace child steps forth the child artist, a delicate sprite, who shall make you laugh and make you weep. Did not the great Sir Walter sway to and fro, sobbing his fill, to his little pets, speaking of, "For I am sick, and capable of fears, oppressed with wrong, and therefore full of fears, a widow, husbandless, subject to fears, a woman, naturally born to fears"? Major B. Fleming was, to be sure, a child genius, but in this book we learn by what carefully graduated steps a child who is not a genius, is not even born of cultivated parents, may be taught the fine art of beautiful and perfect speaking. But that is only the first step in the acquisition of the children's art. The child should speak beautiful thoughts so beautifully, with such delicate rendering of each nuance of meaning, that he becomes to the listener the interpreter of the author's thought. Now consider what appreciation, sympathy, power of expression this implies, and you will grant that the children's art is, as Steele said of the society of his wife, a liberal education in itself. It is objected, children are such parrots. They say a thing as they hear it said. As for troubling themselves to appreciate and interpret, not a bit of it. Most true of the "My name is Norval" style of recitation, but throughout this volume the child is led to find the just expression of the thought for himself. Never is the poorer teacher allowed to set a pattern, say this as I say it. The ideas are kept well within the child's range, and the expression is his own. He is caught with guile, his very naughtiness is pressed into service. He finds a dozen ways of saying, I shan't, is led cunningly up to the point of expressing himself, and he does it, to his own surprise and delight. The pieces given here for recitation are a treasure trove of new joys. Wynken, Blynken, and Nod, Miss Lily White's party, and the two kittens would compel any child to recite. Try a single piece over with the author's markings and suggestions, and you will find there is as much difference between the result as ordinary reading aloud as there is in a musical composition played with and without the composer's expression marks. I hope that my readers will train their children in the art of recitation. In the coming days, more even than in our own, will it behoove every educated man and woman to be able to speak effectively in public, and in learning to recite you learn to speak. Memorizing. Recitation and committing to memory are not necessarily the same thing, and it is well to store a child's memory with a good deal of poetry, learnt without labor. Some years ago I chanced to visit a house, the mistress of which had educational notions of her own, upon which she was bringing up a niece. She presented me with a large foolscap, sheet written all over with the titles of poems, some of them long and difficult. Tintern Abbey, for example. She told me that her niece could repeat to me any of these poems that I liked to ask for, and that she had never learnt a single verse by heart in her life. The girl did repeat several of the poems on the list, quite beautifully and without hesitation, and then the lady unfolded her secret. She thought she had made a discovery, and I thought so too. She read a poem through to E. Then the next day, while the little girl was making a doll's frock, perhaps, she read it again. Once again the next day, while E's hair was being brushed. She got in about 6 or more readings, according to the length of the poem, at odd and unexpected times, and in the end E could say the poem which she had not learned. I have tried the plan often since, and found it effectual. The children must not try to recollect or to say the verse over to himself, but, as far as may be, present an open mind to receive an impression of interest. Half a dozen repetitions should give children possession of such poems as Dolly and Dick. Do you ask what the birds say? Little lamb, who made thee? And the like. The gains of such a method of learning are, that the edge of the child's enjoyment is not taken of by weariful verse by verse repetitions, and also that the habit of making mental images is unconsciously formed. I remember once discussing the subject with the late Miss Anna Swanwick, in some connection with Browning which I do not recall, but in the course of talk an extremely curious incident transpired. A lady, a niece of Miss Swanwick's, said that after a long illness, during which she had not been allowed to do anything, she read Lycidas through, by way of a first treat to herself as a convalescent. She was surprised to find herself the next day repeating to herself long passages. Then she tried the whole poem, and found she could say it off, the result of this single reading, for she had not learned the poem before her illness, nor read it with particular attention. She was much elated by the treasure trove she had chanced upon, and to test her powers she read the whole of Paradise Lost, book by book, and with the same result. She could repeat it, book by book, after a single reading. She enriched herself by acquiring other treasures during her convalescence. But as health returned, and her mind became preoccupied with many interests, she found she no longer had this astonishing power. It is possible that the disengaged mind of a child is as free to take as a strong to hold beautiful images clothed in beautiful words, as was that of this lady during her convalescence. But let me again say, every effort of the kind, however unconscious, means wear and tear of brain substance. Let the child lie fallow till he is 6, and then, in this matter of memorizing, as in others, attempt only a little, and let the poems the child learns be simple and within the range of his own thought and imagination. At the same time, when there is so much noble poetry within a child's compass, the pity of it, that he should be allowed to learn twaddle. End of Part 5, Chapter 7.
Part 5, Chapter 8 of the Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Aaron Lebowitz. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 8, Reading for Older Children. In teaching to read, as in other matters, c'est le premier pas qui coûte. The child who has been taught to read with care and deliberation till he has mastered the words of a limited vocabulary, usually does the rest for himself. The attention of his teachers should be fixed on 2 points: that he acquires the habit of reading, and that he does not fall into slipshod habits of reading. The habit of reading. The most common and the monstrous defect in the education of the day is that children fail to acquire the habit of reading. Knowledge is conveyed to them by lessons and talk, but the studious habit of using books as a means of interest and delight is not acquired. This habit should be begun early, so as soon as the child can read at all, he should read for himself, and to himself, history, legends, fairy tales, and other suitable matter. He should be trained from the first to think that one reading of any lesson is enough to enable him to narrate what he has read, and will thus get the habit of slow, careful reading, intelligent even when it is silent, because he reads with an eye to the full meaning of every clause. Reading aloud. He should have practice, too, in reading aloud, for the most part, in the books he is using for his term's work. These should include a good deal of poetry, to accustom him to the delicate rendering of shades of meaning, and especially to make him aware that words are beautiful in themselves, that they are a source of pleasure, and are worthy of our honor, and that a beautiful word deserves to be beautifully said, with a certain roundness of tone and the precision of utterance. Quite young children are open to this sort of teaching, conveyed not in a lesson, but by a word now and then. Limitation. In this connection, the teacher should not trust the setting, as it were, a copy in reading for the children's imitation. They do imitate readily enough, catching tricks of emphasis and action in an amusing way. But these are mere tricks, an aping of intelligence. The child must express what he feels to be the author's meaning, and this sort of intelligent reading comes only of the habit of reading with understanding. Reading to children. It is a delight to older people to read aloud to children, but this should be only an occasional treat and indulgence, aloud before bedtime, for example. We must remember the natural inertness of a child's mind, give him the habit of being read to, and he will steadily shirk the labor of reading for himself. Indeed, we all like to be spoon-fed with our intellectual meat, or we should read and think more for ourselves and be less eager to run after lectures. Questions on the subject matter. When the child is reading, he should not be teased with questions as to the meaning of what he has read, the signification of this word or that. What is annoying to older people is equally annoying to children. Besides, it is not of the least consequence that they should be able to give the meaning of every word they read. A knowledge of meanings, that is, an ample and correct vocabulary, is only arrived at in one way, by the habit of reading. A child unconsciously gets the meaning of a new word from the context, if not the first time he meets with it, then the second or the third, but he is on the lookout, and will find out for himself the sense of any expression he does not understand. Direct questions on the subject matter of what a child has read are always a mistake. Let him narrate what he has read, or some part of it. He enjoys this sort of consecutive reproduction, but abominates every question in the nature of a riddle. If there must be riddles, let it be his to ask and the teacher's to direct him to the answer. Questions that lead to a side issue or to a personal view are allowable, because these interest children. What would you have done in his place? Lesson books. A child has not begun his education until he has acquired the habit of reading to himself, with interest and pleasure. Books fully on the level with his intelligence. I'm speaking now of his lesson books, which are all too apt to be written in the style of insufferable twaddle, probably because they are written by persons who have never chanced to meet the child. All who know children know that they do not talk in twaddle, and do not like it, and prefer that which appeals to their understanding. Their lesson book should offer matter for their reading, whether aloud or to themselves, therefore they should be written with literary power. As for the matter of these books, let us remember that children can take in ideas and principles, whether the latter be moral or mechanical, as quickly and clearly as we do ourselves, perhaps more so. But detailed processes, lists, and summaries blunt the edge of a child's delicate mind. Therefore, the selection of their first lesson books is a matter of grave importance. Because it rests with these, they give children the idea that knowledge is supremely attractive and that reading is delightful. Once the habit of reading his lesson books with delight is set up in the child, his education is not completed, but ensured. He will go on for himself in spite of the obstructions which school too commonly throws in his way. Slipshod habits. Inattention. I have already spoken of the importance of a single reading. If a child is not able to narrate what he has read once, let him not get the notion that he may, or that he must, read it again. A look of slight regret because there is a gap in his knowledge will convict him. The power of reading with perfect attention will not be gained by the child who is allowed to moon over his lessons. For this reason, reading lessons must be short. 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour of fixed attention is enough for children of the ages we have in view, and a lesson of this length will enable the child to cover 2 or 3 pages of his book. The same rule as to the length of a lesson applies to children whose lessons are read to them, because they are not yet able to read for themselves. Careless enunciation. It is important that, when reading aloud, children should make due use of the vocal organs, and for this reason, a reading lesson should be introduced by 2 or 3 simple breathing exercises, as for example a long inspiration with closed lips and a slow expiration with open mouth. If a child read through his nose, it is well to consult a doctor. An operation for adenoids may be necessary, which is rarely distressing and should be performed while children are young. Provincial pronunciation and slipshod enunciation must be guarded against. Practice in pure vowel sounds and the respect for words which will not allow of their being hastily slurred over should cure these defects. By the way, quite little children commonly enunciate beautifully, because a big word is a new acquirement which they delight in and make the most of. Our efforts should be directed to make older children hold words in like esteem. The habit of minding your stops comes of intelligent reading. A child's understanding of the passage will lead him to correct pointing. End of Part 5, Chapter 8.
Part 5, Chapter 9 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 9, The Art of Narrating. Read by Lisa A. Children narrate by nature. Narrating is an art, like poetry making or painting, because it is there in every child's mind, waiting to be discovered, and is not the result of any process of disciplinary education. A creative fiat calls it forth. Let him narrate, and the child narrates fluently, copiously in ordered sequence, with fit and graphic details, with a just choice of words, without verbosity or tautology, so soon as he can speak with ease. This amazing gift with which normal children are born is allowed to lie fallow in their education.
Bobby will come home with a heroic narrative of a fight he has seen between Duke and a dog in the street. It is wonderful. He has seen everything, and he tells everything with splendid vigour in the true epic vein. But so ingrained is our contempt for children that we see nothing in this but Bobby's foolish, childish way. Whereas here, if we have eyes to see and grace to build, is the ground plan of his education. Until he is 6, let Bobby narrate only when and what he has a mind to. He must not be called upon to tell anything. Is this the secret of the strange long talks we watch with amusement between creatures of 2 and 4 and 5? Is it possible that they narrate while they are still inarticulate, and that the other inarticulate person takes it all in? They try us, poor dear elders, and we reply, "Yes, really, do you think so?" to the babble of those whose meaning we have no comprehension. Be this as it may, of what goes on in the dim region of under 2 we have no assurance. But wait till the little fellow has words, and he will tell without end to whomsoever will listen to the tale, but for choice to his own compeers. This power should be used in their education. Let us take the goods the gods provide. When the child is 6, not earlier, let him narrate the fairy tale which has been read to him, episode by episode, upon one hearing of each; the Bible tale read to him in the words of the Bible; the well-written animal story, or all about other lands from some such volume as The World at Home. The 7-years-old boy will have begun to read for himself, but must get most of his intellectual nutriment by ear, certainly, but read to him out of books. Geography, sketches from ancient history, Robinson Crusoe, The Pilgrim's Progress, Tanglewood Tales, Heroes of Asgard, and much of the same calibre, will occupy him until he is 8. The points to be borne in mind are, that he should have no book which is not a child's classic, and that given the right book it must not be diluted with talk or broken up with questions, but given to the boy in fit portions, as wholesome meat for his mind, in the full trust that a child's mind is able to deal with its proper food. The child of 8 or 9 is able to tackle the more serious material of knowledge, but our business for the moment is with what children under 9 can narrate. Method of lesson. In every case the reading should be consecutive from a well-chosen book. Before the reading for the day begins, the teacher should talk a little, and get the children to talk, about the last lesson, with a few words about what is to be read, in order that the children may be animated by expectation. But she should beware of explanation, and especially of forestalling the narrative. Then she may read 2 or 3 pages, enough to include an episode. After that, let her call upon the children to narrate, in turns if there be several of them. They not only narrate with spirit and accuracy, but succeed in catching the style of their author. It is not wise to tease them with corrections. They may begin with an endless chain of ands, but they soon leave this off, and their narrations become good enough in style and composition to be put in a print book. This sort of narration lesson should not occupy more than a quarter of an hour. The book should always be deeply interesting, and when the narration is over, there should be a little talk in which moral points are brought out, pictures shown to illustrate the lesson, or diagrams drawn on the blackboard. As soon as children are able to read with ease and fluency, they read their own lesson, either aloud or silently, with a view to narration. But where it is necessary to make omissions, as in the Old Testament narratives and Plutarch's Lives, for example, it is better that the teacher should always read the lesson which is to be narrated. End of Part 5, Chapter 9.
Part 5, Chapter 10 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 10, Writing. Read by Lisa A. Perfect accomplishment. I can only offer a few hints on the teaching of writing, though much might be said. First, let the child accomplish something perfectly in every lesson: a stroke, a pothook,
a letter. Let the writing lesson be short. It should not last more than 5 or 10 minutes. Ease in writing comes by practice, but that must be secured later. In the meantime, the thing to be avoided is the habit of careless work, humpy M's, angular O's. Printing. But the child should have practice in printing before he begins to write. First, let him print the simplest of the capital letters with the single curves and straight lines. When he can make the capitals and large letters with some firmness and decision, he might go on to the small letters, printed, as in the type we call italics, only upright, as simple as possible, and large. Steps in teaching. Let the stroke be learned first, then the pothook, then the letters of which the pothook is an element, N, M, V, W, R, H, P, Y, then O, and letters of which the curve is an element, A, C, G, E, X, S, Q, then looped and irregular letters, B, L, F, T, etc. One letter should be perfectly formed in a day, and the next day the same elemental forms repeated in another letter until they become familiar. By and by copies, 3 or 4 of the letters they have learned grouped into a word, man, ant. The lesson to be the production of the written word once, without a single fault in any letter. At this stage the chalk and blackboard are better than pen and paper, as it is well that the child should rub out until his own eye is satisfied with the word or letter he has written. Of the further stages, little need be said. Secure that the child begins by making perfect letters, and is never allowed to make faulty ones, and the rest he will do for himself. As for a good hand, do not hurry him. His handwriting will come by and by, out of the character that is in him. But as a child, he cannot be said, strictly speaking, to have character. Set good copies before him, and see that he imitates his model dutifully. The writing lesson being not so many lines, or a copy, that is, a page of writing, but a single line, which is as exactly as possible a copy of the characters set. The child may have to write several lines before he succeeds in producing this. Text hand. If he write in books with copperplate headlines, which are, on the whole, to be eschewed, discrimination should be exercised in the choice of these. In many of them the writing is atrocious, and the letters are adorned with flourishes, which increase the pupil's labour, but by no means improve his style. One word more. Do not hurry the child into small hand. It is unnecessary that he should labour much over what is called large hand, but text hand, the medium size, should be continued until he makes the letters with ease. It is much easier for the child to get into an irregular scribble by way of small hand than to get out of it again. In this, as in everything else, the care of the educator must be given not only to the formation of good, but to the prevention of bad habits. A new handwriting. Some years ago I heard of a lady who was elaborating, by means of the study of old Italian and other manuscripts, a system of beautiful handwriting, which could be taught to children. I waited patiently, though not without some urgency, for the product of this new kind of copybook. The need for such an effort was very great, for the distinctly commonplace writing taught from existing copybooks, however painstaking and legible, cannot but have a rather vulgarizing effect both on the writer and the reader of such manuscript. At last the lady, Mrs. Robert Bridges, has succeeded in her tedious and difficult undertaking, and this book for teachers will enable them to teach their pupils a style of writing which is pleasant to acquire because it is beautiful to behold. It is surprising how quickly young children, even those already confirmed in ugly writing, take to this new handwriting. But Mrs. Bridges' purpose in a new handwriting will be better understood by some passages quoted, with her permission, from her preface. Quote, "The accompanying 10 plates are intended chiefly for those who teach writing. A few words, both of apology and explanation, are needed to introduce them. I was always interested in handwriting, and after making acquaintance with the Italianized Gothic of the 16th century, I consciously altered my hand towards some likeness with its forms and general character. The script happening to please, I was often asked to make alphabets and copies, and begged by professional teachers to have such a book as this printed, that they might use it in their schools. One can never quite satisfy oneself in the making of models for others to copy, but these plates are very much what I intended, though, owing to my inexperience, some of them have suffered in the reproduction. A child must first learn to control his hand and constrain it to obey his eye. At this earliest stage, any simple forms will serve the purpose, and hence it might be further argued that the forms are always indifferent, and that full mastery of the hand can be as well attained by copying bad models as good. But this can hardly be. The ordinary copybook, the aim of which seems to be to economize the component parts of the letters, cannot train the hand, as more varied shapes will, nor does this uniformity, exclusive of beauty, offer as good training to the eye. Moreover, I should say that variety and beauty of form are attractive, even to little children, and that the attempt to create something which interests them cheers and crowns their stupendous efforts with a pleasure that cannot be looked for in the task of copying monotonous shapes. But whether such a hand as that here shown lends itself as easily as the more uniform model to the development of a quick, useful cursive, I cannot say, and it is possible that the degradations inevitable in the habit of quick writing might produce a mere untidiness, almost the worst reproach of penmanship. Some of the best English hands of today are as good a quick cursive as one can desire, and show points of real beauty, but such hands are rare, and are only those which have, as we say, character, which probably means that the writer would have done well for himself under any system, whereas the average hands, which are the natural outcome of the old copybook writing, degraded by haste, seem to owe their common ugliness to the mean type from which they sprang, and the writers, when they have occasion to write well, find they can do but little better, and only prove that haste was not the real cause of their bad writing." End quote. How to use. The method of using Mrs. Bridges' handwriting, which we find most effectual, is to practice each form on the blackboard from the plate, and later to use pencil, and still later, pen and ink. By and by the children will be promoted to transcribe little poems, and so on, in this very pleasing script. Set headlines are to be avoided, as children fail to use the forms of the headline in their ordinary writing. It is sometimes objected that this rather elaborate and beautiful handwriting will interfere with a characteristic hand, but it seems to me that to have a beautiful instead of a commonplace basis for handwriting is a great gain. End of Part 5, Chapter 10. Part 5, Chapter 11 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 11, Transcription. Read by Lisa A. Value of transcription. The earliest practice in writing proper for children of 7 or 8 should be not letter writing or dictation, but transcription, slow and beautiful work, for which the new handwriting is to be preferred, though perhaps some of the more ornate characters may be omitted with advantage. Transcription should be an introduction to spelling. Children should be encouraged to look at the word, see a picture of it with their eyes shut, and then write from memory. Children should transcribe favorite passages. A certain sense of possession and delight may be added to this exercise if children are allowed to choose for transcription their favorite verse in one poem and another. This is better than to write a favorite poem, an exercise which stales on the little people before it is finished. But a book of their own, made up of their own chosen verses, should give them pleasure. Small text hand, double-ruled lines. Double-ruled lines, small text hand, should be used at first, as children are eager to write very minute, small hand, and once they have fallen into this habit, it is not easy to get good writing. A sense of beauty in their writing, and in the lines they copy, should carry them over this stage of their work with pleasure. Not more than 10 minutes or a quarter of an hour should be given to the early writing lessons. If they are longer, the children get tired and slovenly. Position in writing. For the writing position, children should sit so that light reaches them from the left, and desk or table should be at a comfortable height. It would be a great gain if children were taught from the first to hold the pen between the first and second fingers, steadying it with the thumb. This position avoids the uncomfortable strain on the muscles produced by the usual way of holding a pen, a strain which causes writer's cramp in the later days, when there is much writing to be done. The pen should be held in a comfortable position, rather near the point, fingers and thumb somewhat bent, and the hand resting on the paper. The writer should also be allowed to support himself with the left hand on the paper, and should write in an easy position with bent head but not with stooping figure. It would be unnecessary to say that the flat of the nib should be used, if children had not a happy gift for making spider marks with the nib held sideways. In all writing lessons, free use should be made of the blackboard by both teacher and children, by way of model and practice. Desks. The best desks I know are those recommended by Dr. Roth, single desks which may be raised or lowered, moved backwards or forwards, with seat, back, and a back pad, and rests for the feet. There may be others as good, even better in the market, but these seem to answer every purpose. Children's table. For little children it is a good plan to have a table of the right height made by the house carpenter, the top of the table consisting of 2 leaves with hinges. These leaves open in the middle and disclose a sort of box in the space, which is often used for a drawer, the table top itself making the lids of the box. Such a receptacle for the children's books, writing materials, etc., is more easily kept neat by themselves than is an ordinary drawer or box. End of Part 5, Chapter 11. Part 5, Chapter 12 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 12, Spelling and Dictation, read by Lisa A. Of all the mischievous exercises in which children spend their school hours, dictation, as commonly practiced, is perhaps the most mischievous, and this because people are slow to understand that there is no part of a child's work at school which some philosophic principle does not underlie. A fertile cause of bad spelling. The common practice is for the teacher to dictate a passage, clause by clause, repeating each clause perhaps 3 or 4 times, under a fire of questions from the writers. Every line has errors in spelling, 1, 2, 3 perhaps. The conscientious teacher draws her pencil under these errors, or solemnly underlines them with red ink. The children correct in various fashions. Sometimes they change books, and each corrects the errors of another, copying the word from the book or from the blackboard. A few benighted teachers still cause children to copy their own error along with the correction, which last is written 3 or 4 times, learned, and spelt to the teacher. The latter is astonished at the pure perversity which causes the same errors to be repeated again and again, notwithstanding all these painstaking efforts. The rationale of spelling. But the fact is, the gift of spelling depends upon the power the eye possesses to take, in a photographic sense, a detailed picture of a word, and this is a power and habit which must be cultivated in children from the first. When they have read cat, they must be encouraged to see the word with their eyes shut, and the same habit will enable them to image Thermopylae. This picturing of words upon the retina appears to me to be the only royal road to spelling. An error once made and corrected leads to fearful doubt for the rest of one's life as to which was the wrong way and which the right. Most of us are haunted by some such doubt as to whether balance, for instance, should have 1 L or 2, and the doubt is born of a correction. Once the eye sees a misspelt word, that image remains. And if there is also the image of the word rightly spelt, we are perplexed as to which is which. Now we see why there could not be a more ingenious way of making bad spellers than dictation, as it is commonly taught. Every misspelt word is an image in the child's brain, not to be obliterated by the right spelling. It becomes, therefore, the teacher's business to prevent false spelling, and if an error has been made, to hide it away, as it were, so that the impressions may not become fixed. Steps of a dictation lesson. Dictation lessons, conducted in some such way as the following, usually result in good spelling. A child of 8 or 9 prepares a paragraph, older children a page or 2 or 3 pages. The child prepares by himself, by looking at the word he is not sure of, and then seeing it with his eyes shut. Before he begins, the teacher asks what words he thinks will need his attention. He generally knows, but the teacher may point out any word likely to be a cause of stumbling. He lets his teacher know when he is ready. The teacher asks if there are any words he is not sure of. These she puts one by one on the blackboard, letting the child look till he has a picture, and then rubbing the word out. If anyone is still doubtful, he should be called to put the word he is not sure of on the board, the teacher watching to rub out the word when a wrong letter begins to appear, and again helping the child to get a mental picture. Then the teacher gives out the dictation, clause by clause, each clause repeated once. She dictates with a view to the pointing, which the children are expected to put in as they write, but they must not be told comma, semicolon, etc. After the sort of preparation I have described, which takes 10 minutes or less, there is rarely an error in spelling. If there be, it is well worth while for the teacher to be on the watch with slips of stamp paper to put over the wrong word, that its image may be erased as far as possible. At the end of the lesson, the child should again study the wrong word in his book until he says he is sure of it, and should write it correctly on the stamp paper. A lesson of this kind secures the hearty cooperation of children, who feel they take their due part in it, and it also prepares them for the second condition of good spelling, which is much reading combined with the habit of imaging the words as they are read. Illiterate spelling is usually a sign of sparse reading, but sometimes of hasty reading without the habit of seeing the words that are skimmed over. Spelling must not be lost sight of in the children's other studies, though they should not be teased to spell. It is well to write a difficult proper name, for example, on the blackboard in the course of history or geography readings, rubbing the word out when the children say they can see it. The whole secret of spelling lies in the habit of visualizing words from memory, and children must be trained to visualize in the course of their reading. They enjoy this way of learning to spell. End of Part 5, Chapter 12. Part 5, Chapter 13 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 13, Composition. Read by Lisa A. George Osborne's essay. Quote, "What a prodigiously well-read and delightful person the Reverend Lawrence Veal was, George's master. He knows everything," Amelia said. "He says there is no place in the bar or the Senate that Georgie may not aspire to. Look here," and she went to the piano drawer and drew out a theme of George's composition. "This great effort of genius, which is still in the possession of Georgie's mother, is as follows. On selfishness. Of all the vices which degrade the human character, selfishness is the most odious and contemptible. An undue love of self leads to the most monstrous crimes, and occasions the greatest misfortunes both in states and families. As a selfish man will impoverish his family, and often bring them to ruin, so a selfish king brings ruin on his people, and often plunges them into war. Example, the selfishness of Achilles, as remarked by the poet Homer, occasioned 1,000 woes to the Greeks. Miri Achaeos algae ethike. Homer, Iliad. The selfishness of the late Napoleon Bonaparte occasioned innumerable wars in Europe, and caused him to perish, himself, in a miserable island, that of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. We see by these examples that we are not to consult our own interest and ambition, but that we are to consider the interests of others as well as our own. George S. Osborne, Athene House, 24th April, 1827. Think of him, George was 10, writing such a hand, and quoting Greek, too, at his age, the delighted mother said. End quote. And well might Mrs. George Sedley be delighted. Would not many a mother today triumph in such a literary effort? What can Thackeray be laughing at? Or does he, in truth, give us this little theme as a tour de force? An educational futility. I think this great moral teacher here throws down the gauntlet in challenge of an educational futility which is practised, and an educational fallacy which is accepted, even in the 20th century. That futility is the exaction of original composition from schoolboys and schoolgirls. The proper function of the mind of the young scholar is to collect material for the generalizations of after life. If a child is asked to generalize, that is, to write an essay upon some abstract theme, a double wrong is done him. He is brought up before a stone wall by being asked to do what is impossible to him, and that is discouraging. But a worse moral injury happens to him, in that having no thought of his own to offer on the subject, he puts together such tags of commonplace thought as have come in his way, and offers the whole as his composition, an effort which puts a strain upon his conscience while it piques his vanity. In these days, masters do not consciously put their hand to the work of their pupils, as did that prodigiously well-read and delightful master who had the educating of George Osborne. But perhaps, without knowing it, they give the ideas which the cunning schoolboy seizes to stick into the essay he hates. Sometimes they do more. They deliberately teach children how to build a sentence and how to bind sentences together. Lessons in composition. Here is a series of preliminary exercises, or rather a part of the series, which numbers 40, intended to help a child to write an essay on an umbrella, from a book of the hour proceeding from one of our best publishing houses. Step 1. 1. What are you? 2. How did you get your name? 3. Who uses you? 4. What were you once? 5. What were you like then? 6. Where were you obtained or found? 7. Of what stuff or materials are you made? 8. From what sources do you come? 9. What are your parts? 10. Are you made, grown, or fitted together? Step 2. I am an umbrella, and am used by many people, young and old. I get my name from a word which means a shade. The stick came perhaps from America, and is quite smooth, even, and polished, so that the metal ring may slide easily up and down the stick. My parts are a frame and a cover. My frame consists of a stick about a yard long, wires, and a sliding metal band. At the lower end of the stick is a steel ferrule or ring. This keeps the end from wearing away when I am used in walking. Step 3. Now use it, is, are, and was instead of I, have, my, and am. Exercise. Now write out your own description of it. Such teaching, a public danger. And this is work intended for standards 6 and 7. That is to say, this kind of thing is the final literary effort to be exacted from children in our elementary schools. The 2 volumes, I quote from near the end of the second and more advanced volume, are not to be gibbeted as exceptionally bad. A few years ago, the appalling discovery was made that both in secondary and elementary schools, composition was dreadfully defective, and therefore badly taught. Since then, many volumes have been produced, more or less on the lines indicated in the above citation, and distinguished publishers have not perceived that to offer to the public, with the sanction of their name, works of this sterilizing and injurious character is an offence against society. The body of a child is sacred in the eye of the law, but his intellectual powers may be annihilated on such starvation diet as this, and nothing said. The worst of it is, both authors and publishers in every case act upon the fallacy that well-intentioned effort is always excusable, if not praiseworthy. They do not perceive that no effort is permissible towards the education of children without an intelligent conception both of children and of what is meant by education. Composition comes by nature. In fact, lessons on composition should follow the model of the famous essay on snakes in Ireland. There are none. For children under 9, the question of composition resolves itself into that of narration, varied by some such simple exercise as to write a part and narrate a part, or write the whole account of a walk they have taken, a lesson they have studied, or of some simple matter that they know. Before they are 10, children who have been in the habit of using books will write good, vigorous English with ease and freedom, that is, if they have not been hampered by instructions. It is well for them not even to learn rules for the placing of full stops and capitals until they notice how these things occur in their books. Our business is to provide children with material in their lessons, and leave the handling of such material to themselves. If we would believe it, composition is as natural as jumping and running to children who have been allowed due use of books. They should narrate in the first place, and they will compose, later, readily enough, but they should not be taught composition. End of Part 5, Chapter 13.
Part 5, Chapter 14 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 14. Read by J.L. Baldwin. Bible Lessons. Children enjoy the Bible. We are apt to believe that children cannot be interested in the Bible unless its pages be watered down, turned into the slipshod English we prefer to offer them. Here is a suggestive anecdote of the childhood of Mrs. Harrison, one of the pair of little Quaker maidens introduced to us in the autobiography of Mary Howitt, the better known of the sisters. One day she found her way into a lumber room. There she caught sight of an old Bible, and turning over its yellow leaves she came upon words that she had not heard at the usual morning readings, the opening chapters of St. Luke, which her father objected to read aloud, and the closing chapter of Revelation. The exquisite picture of the great child's birth in the one chapter, and the beauty of the description of the New Jerusalem in the other, were seized upon by the eager little girl of 6 years old with a rapture which, she used to say, no novel in after years ever produced. And here is a mention of a child of 5. The little ones read every day the events of Holy Week with me. Z is inexpressibly interesting in his deep, reverent interest, almost excitement. We are probably quite incapable of measuring the religious receptivity of children. Nevertheless, their fitness to apprehend the deep things of God is a fact with which we are called to deal prudently, and to deal reverently. And that because, as none can appreciate more fully than the Darwinian, the attitude of thought and feeling in which you place a child is the vital factor in his education. Should know the Bible text. Children between the ages of 6 and 9 should get a considerable knowledge of the Bible text. By 9 they should have read the simple and suitable narrative portions of the Old Testament and, say, 2 of the Gospels. The Old Testament should, for various reasons, be read to children. The Gospel stories they might read for themselves as soon as they can read them beautifully. It is a mistake to use paraphrases of the text. The fine roll of Bible English appeals to children with a compelling music, and they will probably retain through life their first conception of the Bible scenes, and also the very words in which these scenes are portrayed. This is a great possession. Half the clever talk we hear today, and half the uneasiness which underlies this talk, are due to a thorough and perfect ignorance of the Bible text. The points of assault are presented to men's minds naked and jagged, without atmosphere, perspective, proportion, until the Bible comes to mean for many the speaking of Balaam's ass or the standing still of the sun at Joshua's bidding. But let the imaginations of children be stored with the pictures, their minds nourished upon the words, of the gradually unfolding story of the Scriptures, and they will come to look out upon a wide horizon within which persons and events take shape in their due place and in due proportion. By degrees they will see that the world is a stage whereon the goodness of God is continually striving with the wilfulness of man, that some heroic men take sides with God, and that others, foolish and headstrong, oppose themselves to him. The fire of enthusiasm will kindle in their breast, and the children too will take their side without much exhortation, or any thought or talk of spiritual experience. Essential and accidental truth. As for whether such and such a narrative be a myth, or a parable, or a circumstance that has actually occurred, such questions do not affect the sincere mind of a child, because they have nothing to do with the main issues. It is quite well to bring before children, in the course of their Bible readings, whatever new light modern research puts in our way. The more we can help them in this way, the more vivid and real will Bible teaching become to them. But this grace, at any rate, the children may claim at our hands, that they shall not be disturbed by questions of authenticity in their Bible reading any more than in their reading of English history. Let them hear the story of the Garden of Eden, for example, as it stands. Just so, we might even let them have the story of the man who went fishing and found a goodly pearl. And this because the thing that matters in both stories is the essential truths they embody, and not the mere accidents of time and place. It is conceivable that the pearl of great price was matter of current talk at that time, a so-called fact seized upon by our Lord to make of it the vehicle for essential truth. If we will believe it, the minds of children are, perhaps, more fit than our own to appropriate and deal with truth. By and by they will perceive and discard, if necessary, the accidental circumstances with which the truth is clothed upon. But let us be very chary of our own action. Let us remember that neither we nor the children can bear the white light of naked truth; that if, for example, we succeed in destroying the clothing that covers the story of the first fall, the tree and its fruit, the tempting serpent, the yielding woman, we have no other clothing at hand for the fundamental truths of responsibility, temptation, sin; and once uncovered, with no vesture which we can lay hold upon, the truths themselves will assuredly slip from our grasp. We need not be at the pains to discriminate, in teaching children Bible narratives, between essential and accidental truth, the truth which interprets our own lives, and that which concerns only the time, place, and circumstances proper to the narrative. The children themselves will discern and keep fast hold of the essential, while the merely accidental slips from their memory as from ours. Therefore, let the minds of young children be well stored with the beautiful narratives of the earlier portions of the Old Testament and of the Gospels. But in order that these stories may be always fresh and delightful to them, care must be taken lest Bible teaching stale upon their minds. Children are more capable of being bored than even we ourselves, and many a revolt has been brought about by the undue rubbing in of the Bible, in season and out of season, even in nursery days. But we are considering, not the religious life of children, but their education by lessons; and their Bible lessons should help them to realize in early days that the knowledge of God is the principal knowledge, and therefore that their Bible lessons are their chief lessons. Method of Bible Lessons. The method of such lessons is very simple. Read aloud to the children a few verses covering, if possible, an episode. Read reverently, carefully, and with just expression. Then require the children to narrate what they have listened to as nearly as possible in the words of the Bible. It is curious how readily they catch the rhythm of the majestic and simple Bible English. Then talk the narrative over with them in the light of research and criticism. Let the teaching, moral and spiritual, reach them without much personal application. I know of no better help in the teaching of young children than we get in Canon Patterson Smith's Bible for the Young. Mr. Smith brings both modern criticism and research to bear, so that children taught from his little manuals will not be startled to be told later that the world was not made in 6 days, and at the same time they will be very sure that the world was made by God. The moral and spiritual teaching in these manuals is on broad and convincing lines. It is rather a good plan occasionally to read aloud Mr. Smith's lesson on the subject after the Bible passage has been narrated. Children are more ready to appropriate lessons that are not directly levelled at themselves, while the teacher makes the teaching her own by the interest with which she reads, the pictures and other illustrations she shows, and her conversational remarks. Picture illustrations. The pictures in the illustrated New Testament are, at the same time, reverent and actual, an unusual combination, and children enjoy them greatly. It would be well for them to have only the penny gospel they are reading, but it should perhaps be protected and honoured by an embroidered cover. A tattered Bible is not a wholesome sight for children. The Holy Gospels with illustrations from the Old Masters, published by the S.P.C.K., is admirable. The study of such pictures as are here reproduced should be a valuable part of a child's education. It is no slight thing to realize how the Nativity and the visit of the wise men filled the imagination of the early masters, and with what exceeding reverence and delight they dwelt upon every detail of the sacred story. This sort of impression is not to be had from any up-to-date treatment or up-to-date illustrations, and the child who gets it in early days will have a substratum of reverent feeling upon which should rest his faith. But it is well to let the pictures tell their own tale. The children should study a subject quietly for a few minutes, and then, the picture being removed, say what they have seen in it. It will be found that they miss no little reverent or suggestive detail which the artist has thought well to include. The various R.T.S. publications issued in the series of Bypaths of Bible Knowledge will be found very helpful by the teacher as illustrating modern research, notably Professor Sayce's Fresh Light from Ancient Monuments and Budge's Dwellers on the Nile. Bible Recitations. The learning by heart of Bible passages should begin while the children are quite young, 6 or 7. It is a delightful thing to have the memory stored with beautiful, comforting, and inspiring passages, and we cannot tell when and how this manner of seed may spring up, grow, and bear fruit. But the learning of the parable of the prodigal son, for example, should not be laid on the children as a burden. The whole parable should be read to them in a way to bring out its beauty and tenderness, and then, day by day, the teacher should recite a short passage, perhaps 2 or 3 verses, saying it over some 3 or 4 times until the children think they know it. Then, but not before, let them recite the passage. Next day the children will recite what they have already learned, and so on until they are able to say the whole parable. End of Part 5, Chapter 14.
Part 5, Chapter 15 of Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Thomas Bosk. Home Education Series, Volume 1, Home Education, by Charlotte Mason. Part 5, Chapter 15, Arithmetic. Educative Value of Arithmetic. Of all his early studies, perhaps none is more important to the child as a means of education than that of arithmetic. That he should do sums is of comparatively small importance, but the use of those functions which summing calls into play is a great part of education. So much so, that the advocates of mathematics and of language as instruments of education have until recently divided the field pretty equally between them. The practical value of arithmetic to persons in every class of life goes without remark, but the use of the study in practical life is the least of its uses. The chief value of arithmetic, like that of the higher mathematics, lies in the training it affords to the reasoning powers, and in the habits of insight, readiness, accuracy, intellectual truthfulness it engenders. There is no one subject in which good teaching affects more, as there is none in which slovenly teaching has more mischievous results. Multiplication does not produce the right answer, so the boy tries division. That again fails, but subtraction may get him out of the bog. There is no must be to him. He does not see that one process, and one process only, can give the required result. Now, a child who does not know what rule to apply to a simple problem within his grasp has been ill taught from the first, although he may produce slatefuls of quite right sums in multiplication or long division. Problems within the child's grasp. How is this insight, this exercise of the reasoning powers, to be secured? Engage the child upon little problems within his comprehension from the first, rather than upon set sums. The young governess delights to set a noble long division sum, 953,783,465 divided by 873, which shall fill the child's slate and keep him occupied for a good half hour, and when it is finished, and the child is finished too, done up with the unprofitable labor, the sum is not right after all. The 2 last figures in the quotient are wrong, and the remainder is false. But he cannot do it again. He must not be discouraged by being told it is wrong. So nearly right is the verdict, a judgment inadmissible in arithmetic. Instead of this laborious task, which gives no scope for mental effort, and in which he goes to see at last, from sheer want of attention, say to him, Mr. Jones sent 607, and Mr. Stevens 819, apples to be divided amongst the 27 boys at school on Monday. How many apples apiece did they get? Here he must ask himself certain questions. How many apples altogether? How shall I find out? Then I must divide the apples into 27 heaps to find out each boy's share. That is to say, the child perceives what rules he must apply to get the required information. He is interested. The work goes on briskly. The sum is done in no time, and is probably right, because the attention of the child is concentrated on his work. Care must be taken to give the child such problems as he can work, but yet which are difficult enough to cause him some little mental effort. Demonstrate. The next point is to demonstrate everything demonstrable. The child may learn the multiplication table and do a subtraction sum without any insight into the rationale of either. He may even become a good arithmetician, applying rules aptly, without seeing the reason of them. But arithmetic becomes an elementary mathematical training only insofar as the reason why of every process is clear to the child. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a self-evident fact, admitting of little demonstration, but 4 times 7 equals 28 may be proved. He has a bag of beans, places 4 rows with 7 beans in a row, adds the rows, thus 7 and 7 are 14, and 7 are 21, and 7 are 28. How many 7s in 28? 4. Therefore, it is right to say 4 times 7 equals 28, and the child sees that multiplication is only a short way of doing addition. A bag of beans, counters, or buttons should be used in all the early arithmetic lessons, and the child should be able to work with these freely, and even to add, subtract, multiply, and divide mentally, without the aid of buttons or beans, before he is set to do sums on his slate. He may arrange an addition table with his beans, thus: 2 beans plus 1 bean equals 3 beans, 2 beans plus 2 beans equals 4 beans, 2 beans plus 3 beans equals 5 beans, and so on, and be exercised upon it until he can tell, first without counting, and then without looking at the beans, that 2 plus 7 equals 9, etc. Thus with 3, 4, 5, each of the digits, as he learns each line of his addition table, he is exercised upon imaginary objects: 4 apples and 9 apples, 4 nuts and 6 nuts, etc. And lastly, with abstract numbers: 6 plus 5, 6 plus 8. A subtraction table is worked out simultaneously with the addition table. As he works out each line of additions, he goes over the same ground, only taking away 1 bean, or 2 beans, instead of adding, until he is able to answer quite readily 2 from 7, 2 from 5. After working out each line of addition or subtraction, he may put it on his slate with the proper signs, that is, if he have learned to make figures. It will be found that it requires a much greater mental effort on the child's part to grasp the idea of subtraction than that of addition, and the teacher must be content to go slowly: 1 finger from 4 fingers, 1 nut from 3 nuts, and so forth, until he knows what he is about. When the child can add and subtract numbers pretty freely up to 20, the multiplication and division tables may be worked out with beans as far as 6 times 12. That is, twice 6 are 12, will be ascertained by means of 2 rows of beans, 6 beans in a row. When the child can say readily, without even a glance at his beans, 2 times 8 equals 16, 2 times 7 equals 14, etc., he will take 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 beans and divide them into groups of 2. Then, how many 2's in 10, in 12, in 20, and so on, with each line of the multiplication table that he works out. Problems. Now he is ready for more ambitious problems. Thus, a boy had twice 10 apples. How many heaps of 4 could he make? He will be able to work with promiscuous numbers, as 7 plus 5 minus 3. If he must use beans to get his answer, let him, but encourage him to work with imaginary beans, as a step towards working with abstract numbers. Carefully graduated teaching and daily mental effort on the child's part at this early stage may be the means of developing real mathematical power, and will certainly promote the habits of concentration and effort of mind. Notation: when the child is able to work pretty freely with small numbers, a serious difficulty must be faced, upon his thorough mastery of which will depend his apprehension of arithmetic as a science. In other words, will depend the educational value of all the sums he may henceforth do. He must be made to understand our system of notation. Here, as before, it is best to begin with concrete. Let the child get an idea of 10 units in 1 10 after he has mastered the more easily demonstrable idea of 12 pence in 1 shilling. Let him have a heap of pennies, say 50. Point out the inconvenience of carrying such weighty money to shops. Lighter money is used, shillings. How many pennies is a shilling worth? How many shillings, then, might he have for his 50 pennies? He divides them into heaps of 12, and finds that he has 4 such heaps, and 2 pennies over. That is to say, 50 pence are, or are worth, 4 shillings and 2 pence. I buy 10 pounds of biscuits at 5 pence a pound. They cost 50 pence, but the shopman gives me a bill for 4 shillings 2 pence. Show the child how put down. The pennies, which are worth least, to the right, the shillings, which are worth more, to the left. When the child is able to work freely with shillings and pence, and to understand that 2 in the right-hand column of figures is pence, 2 in the left-hand column shillings, introduce him to the notion of tens and units, being content to work very gradually. Tell him of uncivilized peoples who can only count so far as 5, who say 5 beasts in the forest, 5 fish in the river, when they wish to express an immense number. We can count so far that we might count all day long for years, without coming to the end of the numbers we might name. But after all, we have very few numbers to count with, and very few figures to express them by. We have but 9 figures and a naught. We take the first figure and the naught to express another number, 10. But after that, we must begin again until we get 2 tens, then again till we reach 3 tens, and so on. We call 2 tens 20, 3 tens 30, because T means 10. But if I see figure 4, how am I to know whether it means 4 tens or 4 ones? By a very simple plan. The tens have a place of their own. If you see figure 6 in the 10 place, you know it means 60. The tens are always put behind the units. When you see 2 figures standing side by side, thus 55, the left-hand figure stands for so many tens, that is, the second 5 stands for 10 times as many as the first. Let the child work with tens and units only until he has mastered the idea of the tenfold value of the second figure to the left, and would laugh at the folly of writing 7 in the second column of figures, knowing that thereby it becomes 70. Then he is ready for the same sort of drill in hundreds, and picks up the new idea readily if the principle have been made clear to him, that each remove to the left means a tenfold increase in the value of a number. Meantime, set him no sums. Let him never work with figures the notation of which is beyond him, and when he comes to carry an addition or multiplication sum, let him not say he carries 2 or 3, but 2 tens or 3 hundreds, as the case may be. Weighing and measuring. If the child do not get the ground under his feet at this stage, he works arithmetic ever after by rule of thumb. On the same principle, let him learn weights and measures by measuring and weighing. Let him have scales and weights, sand or rice, paper and twine, and weigh and do up in perfectly made parcels, ounces, pounds, etc. The parcels, though they are not arithmetic, are educative, and afford considerable exercise of judgment as well as of neatness, deftness, and quickness. In like manner, let him work with foot rule and yard measure, and draw up his tables for himself. Let him not only measure and weigh everything about him that admits of such treatment, but let him use his judgment on questions of measure and weight. How many yards long is the tablecloth? How many feet long and broad a map or picture? What does he suppose a book weighs that is to go by parcel post? The sort of readiness to be gained thus is valuable in the affairs of life, and if only for that reason, should be cultivated in the child. While engaged in measuring and weighing concrete quantities, the scholar is prepared to take his first idea of a fraction, half a pound, a quarter of a yard, etc. Arithmetic a means of training. Arithmetic is valuable as a means of training children in habits of strict accuracy, but the ingenuity which makes this exact science tend to foster slipshod habits of mind, a disregard of truth and common honesty, is worthy of admiration. The copying, prompting, telling, helping over difficulties, working with an eye to the answer which he knows, that are allowed in arithmetic lesson under an inferior teacher, are enough to vitiate any child, and quite as bad as these is the habit of allowing that a sum is nearly right, two figures wrong, and so on, and letting the child work it over again. Pronounce a sum wrong or right. It cannot be something between the two. That which is wrong must remain wrong. The child must not be let run away with the notion that wrong can be mended into right. The future is before him. He may get the next sum right, and the wise teacher will make it her business to see that he does, and that he starts with new hope. But the wrong sum must just be let alone. Therefore his progress must be carefully graduated. But there is no subject in which the teacher has a more delightful consciousness of drawing out from day to day new power in the child. Do not offer him a crutch. It is in his own power he must go. Give him short sums, in words rather than in figures, and excite in him the enthusiasm which produces concentrated attention and rapid work. Let his arithmetic lesson be to the child a daily exercise in clear thinking and rapid, careful execution, and his mental growth will be as obvious as the sprouting of seedlings in the spring. The ABC Arithmetic. Instead of entering further into the subject of teaching elementary arithmetic, I should like to refer the reader to the ABC Arithmetic by Messrs. Sonnenschein and Nesbit. The authors found their method upon the following passage from Mill's Logic. The fundamental truths of the science of number all rest on the evidence of sense. They are proved by showing to our eyes and our fingers that any given number of objects, 10 balls for example, may, by separation and rearrangement, exhibit to our senses all the different sets of numbers the sum of which is equal to 10. All the improved methods of teaching arithmetic to children proceed on a knowledge of this fact. All who wish to carry the child's mind along with them in learning arithmetic, all who wish to teach numbers and not mere ciphers, now teach it through the evidence of the senses in the manner we have described. Here we may, I think, trace the solitary source of weakness in a surpassingly excellent manual. It is quite true that the fundamental truths of the science of number all rest on the evidence of sense, but having used eyes and fingers upon 10 balls or 20 balls, upon 10 nuts or leaves or sheep or what not, the child has formed the association of a given number with objects, and is able to conceive of the association of various other numbers with objects. In fact, he begins to think in numbers and not in objects, that is, he begins mathematics. Therefore, I incline to think that an elaborate system of staves, cubes, etc., instead of tens, hundreds, thousands, errs by embarrassing the child's mind with too much teaching, and by making the illustration occupy a more prominent place than the thing illustrated. Dominoes, beans, graphic figures drawn on the blackboard, and the like, are on the other hand aids to the child when it is necessary for him to conceive of a great number with the material of a small one. But to see a symbol of the great numbers and to work with such a symbol are quite different matters. With the above trifling exception, which does not interfere at all with the use of the books, nothing can be more delightful than the careful analysis of numbers and the beautiful graduation of the work, only one difficulty at a time being presented to the mind. The examples and the little problems could only have been invented by writers in sympathy with children. I advise the reader who is interested in the teaching of arithmetic to turn to Mr. Sonnenshine's paper on The Teachings of Arithmetic in Elementary Schools, in one of the volumes published by the Board of Education. Preparation for Mathematics. In the 40s and 50s, it was currently held that the continual sight of the outward and visible signs, geometrical forms and figures, should beget the inward and spiritual grace of mathematical genius, or at any rate, of an inclination to mathematics. But the educationalists of those days forgot, when they gave children boxes of form, and stuck up cubes, hexagons, pentagons, and what not, in every available schoolroom space, the immense capacity for being bored which is common to us all, and is far more strongly developed in children than in grown-ups. The objects which bore us, or the persons who bore us, appear to wear a bald place in the mind, and thought turns from them with sick aversion. Dickens showed us the pathos of it in the schoolroom of the little Gradgrinds, which was bountifully supplied with objects of uncompromising outline. Ruskin, more genially, exposes the fallacy. No doubt geometric forms abound, the skeletons of which living beauty, in contour and gesture, in a hill and plant, is the covering, and the skeleton is beautiful and wonderful to the mind, which has already entered within the portals of geometry. But children should not be presented with the skeleton, but with the living forms which clothe it. Besides, is it not an inverse method to familiarize the child's eye with patterns made by his compasses, or stitched upon his card, in the hope that the form will beget the idea? For the novice, it is probably the rule that the idea must beget the form, and any suggestion of an idea from a form comes only to the initiated. I do not think that any direct preparation for mathematics is desirable. The child, who has been allowed to think and not compelled to cram, hails the new study with delight when the due time for it arrives. The reason why mathematics are a great study is because there exists in the normal mind an affinity and capacity for this study, and too great an elaboration, whether of teaching or of preparation, has, I think, a tendency to take the edge off this manner of intellectual interest. End of Part 5, Chapter 15.